We might get reported.
Welcome to Senate Transportation Committee. It's Friday, April 12th, and we are here to talk about an amendment to 868 Transportation Bill for Senator White from Quincy District. So you can introduce yourself for the record and let us know what you'd like to change on the bill.
Cool. Well, hey, thank you. Good morning, Senate Transportation. I know you guys are in the middle of working on stuff, so I'll try not to take up too much of your time. I served on House Transportation for 4 years before I came over to the Senate, so the T-bill is always something I track. And the main reason that I'm bringing forward this amendment today is because of the work that we did on the Climate Action Plan and also the legislative report on ownership and adoption of electric vehicles, and how the work that we did both by the PUC and by the Climate Action Plan should be reflected in the work that we do within the transportation bill. Because as I'm sure you know, transportation is our largest carbon emitting sector in Vermont. So we have the greatest opportunity to make positive changes for resiliency in the transportation sector compared to thermal and electric. So lots of good things that we should be doing. So when I took a look at the bill, I honed in on sections, right on sections 27 and 28, which relates to the road usage surcharge. And while I'll just start by saying philosophically, I don't think it's the right time for electric vehicles to have a road use surcharge, it was pretty clear from the politics of the committee that that was not something that you would be open to removing. So I wanted to encapsulate my concerns around addressing the Climate Action Plan by trying to meet you where you were at as a committee. So I didn't put forward like a strike through amendment of that. So what are we talking about in the amendment, which if you have it online and you're looking at it online, or if you'd like a paper copy, I can also give you a paper copy.
I have a pen.
Okay, so I worked alongside our JFO and Legislative Counsel, Jen Carvey, to draft the following amendment, which would be a subsection B, and it would have that we have a taking effect, I can read it, shall take effect 90 days, the road usage fee, shall take effect 90 days following a determination by the Commissioner of Motor Vehicles that for the first time new electric vehicle registrations comprised at least 15% of all monthly pleasure car registrations. The idea is that longstanding in the Climate Action Plan and coming out of the PUC report, we have said we would not attempt to disincentivize electric vehicle purchases with a fee until we hit the 15% adoption rate. And the way that it's calculated, from my understanding, I think you got testimony on that from AOT. The way that that is tracked is through vehicle registration. And my concern is that this road user fee, while you've heard testimony that it'll perfectly glide path with us hitting 15%, it's not explicit that that's what would happen. And I have concerns that we will end up in a situation where we will be putting forward this incentive before we hit that 15% mark. Therefore, why did we do the Climate Action Plan? Why did we put forward all this guidance? To get us to meet our carbon emissions requirements, which are statutory legal requirements that we have to meet. So this is a check to make sure that happens. The language was run by DMV and AOT. I don't know if they have a policy position on it, but the mechanics of it seem to be, they understood it. It wasn't, you know, it's a sound logic of an amendment, not whether they agree or disagree. I do not know.
They could implement it.
Yeah, I think it's basically what we heard. Yeah.
Terminology is important, and we keep going around with battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. Your language here is new electric vehicle registrations. Would that include both plug-in as well as, I think?
Thank you for that question. BEV versus PEV was a cabaret skit for House Transportation many years ago.
I'll be bringing it back.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way they talk about it in that.
Yeah. And I even feel that there one of the problems with this discussion is 15% of what has kind of gone back and forth, and folks in the environmental community will tell you that it's actually 15% of sales
Yeah.
and 15% of full 100% electric battery sales. But when we look at the actual language of the PUC, of the climate action report, climate action plan, it actually, I think, aligns more with what this language is than that broader view. So there is even an argument to be made that this doesn't actually get at the full point of all fully electric EV sales. But I wanted to make sure that we were in line with what it seems to have in the climate action plan. So.
And if I understand your reasoning, your main concern is that the fee would impede sales, that it would have a negative effect on sales.
My concern is twofold. One, we have a climate action plan. We should be using it in our legislation. That's really important to me.
We feel like we are.
Yes. And I think, sure. Two, I don't think it will have, I think there's an argument to be made that it will impact sales. I don't think we can say yes or no to that. I know that House Transportation received testimony that that kind of fee wouldn't have a major implication. But I also know that when news comes out that there's a new fee, what I've heard is that people change their purchasing behaviors. So I don't know. My main concern is not that the announcement of this fee will dramatically dip electric vehicle sales in our state, but rather that we will not hit it because of other market forces, and then we're going to be putting a fee in place that is against what the climate action plan recommends timing-wise. We've seen a decline in EV sales in the last few months. We've seen some really important vehicle models be taken off of the production of certain companies like the Ford F-150, the Lightning. So there's lots of market forces, and I don't want us to be in a position where we don't do what the climate action plan does because of market forces. And I also worry that some of the way that we've calculated from 2023 to 2024, I think we might see a leveling off of that big increase that we see in the registration accounting.
So a couple things. One is that Patrick Murphy, who we get a lot of respect for because he's just always on it, says that we will have the 15%, no problem, well before the start of this program. So it kind of leads into your 90 days. So we are likely to meet the 15% mark at some point later this calendar year. A January 25 start date for this fee should be sufficient lead time for DMV to implement and for Vermont to reach 15% in the prior quarter. But listening to your argument, if we weren't ever to reach 15%, we should never have these folks pay anything. I mean, because we are getting testimony over and over again, including senators in the building, that they want to pay their fair share. They feel like they're a pariah because they're not paying anything at all. But anyways, we're gonna be at 15% according to with the state, and we're gonna reach all the guidelines that you're requesting in your bill. So I think the point of the bill is mute when the state said we're going to be where we needed to be anyways.
I just have a kind of a question because so much of what we do is balancing out. And part of what we're looking at also is the extent to which the 15% is somehow the basis for that. It's in the plan, no question about that. But what we're, in terms of, is the extent to which that's an incentive versus what is a disincentive, and that is the concern about the adequacy of our charging.
Oh, yes.
So part of the whole discussion was if we really want to support the take-up, we've got to deal with the adequacy of our charging network. And I guess we saw the limitations of that with the lines by the charging stations this past weekend. So it was very much linking that if we are to, and we had concerns around the House, how they did it, taking money away from public transit, which is also one of the key strategies for carbon reduction, and getting more efficient buses, electric buses on the road, or Sprinter vans. So we were weighing out what is, if you're looking at what is the greatest impediment to the take-up, and obviously what you're seeing in the market is, as you cited, is without a surcharge, obviously. So some of that is happening regardless. But just part of the discussion was, what is the greater impediment, and is it the need to build our charging? So that's why we were looking at it on balance to get to the same goal. But if you're going to have that take up, and then we've adopted the California standards, which is also going to be a major policy force to support the development of EVs. So it was, we're really very concerned about the adequacy of our charging. And so it was for that reason we directly connected it. We thought, if there's anything that seems to be influencing the take-up, it's people's anxiety around the charging and the adequacy of our network. You don't need to respond to that, but it was looking at, on balance, how do we in fact get to where the climate action plan wants to get. And I don't know if, and that's why we connected the two. So I don't know if that helps understand our thinking or balancing it out, but it was very much a part of that as well.
Yeah, I know you said you didn't need a response, but I would say that I really appreciate that the committee moved away from having it be a public transportation electric vehicle connection to just fully electric vehicle to electric vehicle. From my understanding, JFO said it was around $900,000 that you would gain. That isn't adequate enough to resolve the problem.
It would be 1.7 annualized, 1.7 million.
It would be 1.7 every year, starting in
For the- if you get
2025.
full fiscal 12
Yeah,
months.
because it's only a partial year, that's why.
And so how does that relate to the vehicle miles traveled coming into play then? When would that, because isn't
This
this,
would terminate the minute MBUF
Yes.
comes in.
so that would be 2026?
We don't know.
We don't know.
Because they
So-
don't have the grant yet.
Okay, so,
This was considered bridge
Yeah.
until we got to the more refined
Yeah.
MBUF, whatever.
and that, that discussion is, I won't weigh in there because I think I have some philosophical disagreements, but to your point around the connection between those, I have no issues with that.
So, does the climate action plan, we're talking about this target,
Yeah,
but is there something about network adequacy, network charging network?
sure. Have you had a chance
I
to review
prefer-
the pathways? At all?
A while back.
Okay.
I'm
so-
sure if there is anything
Yeah.
there relative to what is the goal there.
So there's 4 pathways for how we move forward with electric vehicle adoption. I can go through them if you
Relative
like.
to the adequacy of the charging network, I wonder.
Yeah,
if
so
it was-
there's a few. I would have to look through it.
They
which
all
one it
kind of
is.
interplay, so.
Yeah, so I can tell you which one it is. Okay, here we go.
They don't
They've got
prioritize-
the,
What?
I don't think they prioritize them over like one over the other.
yeah, it's just strategies. So they list out different strategies on how to get them. And it's too bad that the committee hasn't had opportunity to kind of go over those pathways. So the strategy 3 is public
have.
investment.
Specifically going.
Oh, okay, so strategy 3 is public investment of electric vehicle supply equipment. And it is to continue to support the build out of level 2 EVSE. So to your point, what they would like to see is to have, at the time, we were looking at the VW mitigation fund. So that was the main recommendation, was to have that. We need 170,000 electric vehicles to meet our climate action plan requirements. We're at even 14,000 as it stands, give or take some change.
That's
So
that target, you need a very robust charging network to support that level of.
So this 15% has been dominant in our discussions and where we came to, and this is what was presented to us somewhat recently. So this is from Patrick. It's 13.1% of new sales for PEV purchases in Q4 of 2023 here in Vermont. And I'm glad Patrick's on so he can chime in after this, of course, but
This is the
everything is.
170.
been setting the
Yeah.
table that we are on track. And as I reread the language from the climate action plan, it does say new annual registration. So this track, and I remember asking on this point multiple times what 15% we're talking about, that everything we've heard in testimony is that we are on track to
Then
achieve
this
this
is great.
15%. And I just want to say yesterday, I was very excited to be at the new Tesla dealership. Senator Ingles is going to buy the Beast, so that's going to also help us get to this point. So Teslas are coming online, and it was great to see them in South Burlington. So I feel like the timing that we have in the bill is getting us to this 15% on the timeline that this is outlining.
So your point is that you're concerned that if we require it, even though we're gonna hit it,
I think budgeting has some degree of certainty necessary. So as we look to trying to generate these revenues for the next fiscal year, I'm worried that the language that would have to be adjusted for and come into play, who knows when, might be harder to budget around.
so your preference would be that we have a budget process that is defined rather than based off the climate action plan recommendation in the instance that there is a risk that we don't.
I see us in conformance with the climate action plan from what's been presented to us.
Yeah, so I guess that's where like I don't understand the logic, is because then why would this matter? If we're gonna hit
I
it,
think that, because the recommendation was, they're not so precise. I think we're feeling like that recommendation, which was the recommendation before the climate action plan was written, I think it kind of flowed into the climate action plan. They're not saying this is a magical number. They're saying it's a number. You know, it's like 15% is a good target number. If you're 14.9, climate action plan is not, I don't think you'd have a good argument to say we're not following the climate action plan because we got the 14.95 and not 15. Like if you need to be 21 to buy alcohol, that's a very clear line. I think the 15% is not such a clear line. Like whether it's 14 or 16, it's not gonna change. We didn't have any evidence that is gonna, because what it is, it's based on the innovation curve. And Vermont is really not gonna be pushing that curve. I mean, we can help it by, as it gets more, the dealerships will start having more models, but that's mainly why we're part of the California plan, the California rules. But we have evidence from other states that have fees where they're not seeing a change in sales when they did a fee, like it hasn't impacted. So if we had evidence where like, this is gonna impact sales, you're right, we might not hit it right on by the time we start it, but we're confident, we're doing everything we can to hit it. And it just seems a lot easier for everybody involved if they just say, okay, we're gonna start it on this date. And then we just kind of move forward on that and everybody is behind getting it to not just 15%, but 80%. And that was the thing, that was the best way to get there is just to say, we're gonna get there and we're gonna move on. We're doing everything we can to support that's a bigger goal. And I don't think we would be not in compliance with the recommendations of the climate action plan if we were at 14%, not 15%.
And I think the fact that we're gonna get ahead of this a year ahead of time and potentially get $1.7 million out there to fund, and as Senator Kitchell had pointed out, to help get rid of some of the anxiety of charging. I mean,
It's not anxiety, it's even inadequate.
right. Well,
And we want to move this money to
Yeah.
like.
Anxiety about the inadequacy, I guess.
I mean, over and over again, as we talk with people, and Senator Perchlik and Senator Chittenden and myself, we did go to the Tesla store yesterday. I mean, I think every conversation with EV starts with range anxiety in some way. I mean, so if we can get there faster to get more charging out there to help get rid of that anxiety. I mean, as far as the 2.5 hour wait, 78 vehicles went through the Berlin charging station during these eclipse when I talked to the staff up there. And I certainly would bet that 78 vehicles would have appreciated 8 more charging stations to help them get through there.
Right, and we have the NEVI money for those kind of projects, but what this money will go to the infill for like multifamily housing. We have no money for that kind of stuff. We have the federal money that's focused on the corridors. So we thought it was important to get that money. And because the House bill did have money for this charging, but they took it from electric vehicle charging and electric vehicles and electric vehicle charging for public transportation. We thought that was critical. So we wanted to find the money that we had taken out of this kind of vehicle charging. And this seemed to be the best way And we didn't know during the evidence or convinced that we were gonna impact the electrification goal if we didn't hit it exactly. But we understand your point that like, if we're gonna say that's the goal, why don't we wait till we get it exactly? I get your point.
I think my frustration has been that we haven't prioritized carbon emissions reductions in the transportation sector as a state, in a way that feels like we're actually on track to meet our targets based on the EAN report this year, for example. We're not on track. And I appreciate all of the arguments you have for why you think that this is a better way to do it. I think what many younger Vermonters are concerned about is whether or not we hit our global warming solutions act requirements. And I think that this is a easy way to make sure that we do. And I understand that the administrative burden might be slightly higher with this amendment than if not. But I also think that the risk of us going against a recommendation of the climate action plan continues kind of that rhetoric of like, these are things that we could do, not things that we must do. So I appreciate your time and I respect if you vote against it. As a committee, I'm happy to share the PUC report, which is what helped inform the climate action plan. And I respect that the administration feels that they will hit the 15% mark. I think what has concerned me is in the thermal sector, we've also been told that we would hit certain marks with carbon emissions reductions and targets. And I think broadly, I'm risk averse because we haven't necessarily hit those, even though it's tracked to look like we would.
And we actually, thermal in the last report exceeded the transportation emissions.
I see what you're saying.
The transportation last drive.
Yeah.
Driven, yes, Senator.
Yeah, but I think my point is on the emission.
When you mentioned thermal, it was the first time, in fact, thermal got ahead of transportation.
We're currently calling this a road usage fee. Do you think it might be better, more appropriate to call it an EVSE fee, so an electric vehicle supply equipment fee, so that it's even clearer when electric vehicle purchasers are paying this fee, that it's just to support charging stations?
Is that a question for me?
I don't know. Yeah, it's an interesting point.
Well, I do think it's interesting that to Senator Ingalls' point, the main thing he's heard from electric vehicle owners is that they want to pay their fair share towards the roads. When you have chosen to not actually have that be where the money goes, which does seem to be the main point that I've heard from like Senator Mark McDonald, for example, is he wants to pay for the roads and the bridges just like everyone paying the gas tax. So I think it is an interesting, so I think it is more true to the intent.
That's what we think. It's a bridge to that.
Thank you for that.
But I mean, if you were to vote for my amendment, because I would change the name, I would be very open to adding that.
Okay, any other questions for Senator Wayne? Thank you for.
Thanks. Are you gonna take a vote on this?
Yeah.
May I stick around for the vote? Or are you not doing it today?
No, we can do it now. I didn't know if Patrick, Murphy, or Michelle, who were listening in, had anything they wanted to say, or they were just here for if we had questions.
Thank you, Senator Perchlik. I am going to defer to Patrick. It's been an interesting conversation to listen to, and it's certainly an evolving and very dynamic area. So I think Patrick might have a few things to add to the conversation.
Okay. Patrick, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you. For the record, Patrick Murphy, Vermont Agency of Transportation, where I've worked for the past 2.5 years exclusively on vehicle electrification. So I'm here mostly to just answer any questions that might have come up during the discussion. You know, this is something that has come out of the committee with a desire to fund the community charging infrastructure, which the agency feels is one of those big impediments to EV adoption. So our view is that this is not a disincentive to EV adoption. The numbers that are talked about here do not reflect what the average road usage charge, what people would pay on average in the gas tax to go to the transportation fund. So we're talking about $89 for a battery electric vehicle, $44.50 for a plug-in hybrid. That's probably about $100 less than the average when we're talking about battery electric vehicles. Senator, the comment about 15% is quite right. It is a number. It's not a precise number. And so what we've seen in the data is that we've consistently, although you might have month to month some fluctuations, consistently quarter over quarter, we're increasing not just the absolute number of vehicles, but also the percentage of new vehicle sales. I think that is an important part. So 15%, as it's described in the Climate Action Plan and the prior plans from which that number comes, is the percent of plug-in electric vehicles. So battery electric vehicles and plug-in hybrid electric vehicles of new vehicle sales. And so when I've looked at the proposed amendment, that is one of the main issues with the language, is that it's not percent of just all vehicle registrations in that month. It's a percent of new vehicle sales in that month. And that's a trickier thing for DMV to identify. So we have a number of different sources, and it's private sector sources that track these things. And it's not an exact thing. So the other problematic piece about this is just the time frame in which to implement. So data that we receive from the Department of Environmental Conservation, which is cleaning up the DMV registration data that we receive from other sources. VADA has been very helpful in that. There's always a time lag. So 90 days isn't quite enough when you're considering that we might not know about having reached the 15% in any given month to be able to implement. We had talked about 90 days from this becoming effective as potentially being able to implement on DMV's part. But I think the preferable date would be just date certain, January 2025. This is what's going to happen. It's easier to communicate with the public about that. It's easier for there to be significant testing so that everything works as it should by that date. So I think those are two pieces of language that are, I think, problematic from the standpoint of meeting what is the putative number of 15%, but also just being able to implement. So as far as in keeping with the Climate Action Plan, I think the more that we can do to drive EV adoption, the better we are. So it's important not to kind of lose sight of the larger goals with those intermediate strategic priorities that might not, align in the course of time. So there's also language in the Climate Action Plan that we have to meet 170,000 vehicles by 2030. Modeling then was redone after the Climate Action Plan. And in the Pathways 2 analysis, we've come to a more realistic number of 126,000 because there couldn't ever have been that many vehicles delivered to Vermont in the first place. So things have to evolve as we learn new information. And I think what we're seeing from the data is that we're very likely to meet that 15% later this year. And if we're not there, we're going to be very close. And in the scheme of things, what we've also seen in other states is that this kind of fee, particularly at this level, is not going to disincentivize EV adoption.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And I wondered, Senator, what you had said at one point about a decrease in EV sales. Were you talking about like the news nationally, or did you talk about Vermont?
Yeah, Senator Cummings and I had a conversation. It was like this last quarter, there was a decrease nationally.
Yeah, because I think in Vermont, we haven't seen that it has just been increasing, at least the data that we've seen so far. And I know Beta has data, but you don't have monthly data. You do have monthly data. Have you seen it decrease monthly? Yeah, so it kind of goes, right, but not a trend. Like we're not seeing a decrease trend. Okay, do you have any questions?
On your last comment there, Patrick Murphy, I forgot who said this, but somebody mentioned $1,000 EV fee in New Jersey. Have you seen other states adopting more drastic EV registration fees?
Yeah, there's some that do punitive.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have not seen $1,000 fee, but I've
I've
seen.
heard that too. Where do we hear
You heard
that?
it from me. Yeah.
Oh, from you, yeah.
A reliable source?
So we're not
But
talking.
I have seen that fees that have been.
$1,000 one time.
When you purchase.
I have seen fees, upwards of $300-400. And we shared that map with you earlier this year. Another important point, I think, is that when this 15% language first appeared, it was also before that we had any kind of incentive programs. And so this, predated the end of 2019 when we first implemented the new PV incentive program. Now we have 4 fairly established incentive programs that are among the most generous in the country. And I think there was language in some of those earlier reports that that any kind of fee ought to be paired with a new incentive program. And right now we have 4 in place that are working quite well and have seen sharp increases, particularly in the last half year. So I think we're sort of in good shape that we're not disproportionately impacting households with lower incomes, because we have substantial supports in place for that. And the relative fee amounts of, $89 per year, $44, $45 per year, pale in comparison to what we expect those savings to be from maintenance and fuel costs over the lifetime of that vehicle.
Senator White, you had another comment?
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. It's lovely to see you on screen. I don't know if you can see me. I'm
Yeah.
oh, okay. I'm I'm on the side. I'm in the middle. Hello. Hi. So my question is and this may be more for Ms. Boomhauer as well, but have you discussed the potential legal ramifications of the Global Warming Solutions Act requirements not being met if you were to not hit 15% and move forward with the fee?
I think that's a bigger conversation that I don't think we want to get into here, because that's about the whole goal, not about the 15%.
Yes.
Like that we could not admit that, and there wouldn't be any legal ramifications.
Oh.
Because it's a strategy, not part of the legal obligations around the CO2.
Yes.
So we can meet the CO2 and stay at 14% by other
Yes.
means. So I think the whole bigger goal about meeting it is different than what we're talking about.
But isn't it that they can use this as an example of if we don't take advantage of the strategies? This was an example of us not.
Well, we're saying we are taking care. We are following the strategy.
And I guess my question is, if we don't, like if, let's say it does happen and we're at 14.9, was it discussed that could be?
No, because I don't think it's a point well taken in that, because the 15% is about the diffusion curve. It's not that they said that's what Vermont needs to hit for our emissions. They were like, to get to our 25 or 170,000 goal, we need to help the innovation curve. We need to just move up on that curve to keep it going. But that Vermont isn't going to affect the innovation curve. We could be at 0 or 100%. That's not going to be so determinative of how we're innovating the whole new car market nationally, which we're definitely a small part. So I don't think anybody can make an argument that is so important. That's a linchpin on our transportation or any of our carbon reductions. That number is so precise. So I don't think so. But we could talk to a lawyer.
Yeah, that's kind of, I was wondering if they had talked to a lawyer. But okay.
We have not.
But our legal counsel hasn't indicated that was
Yeah.
Well, it's a bigger thing. I mean, there is a legal issue if you don't
Well, I
hit the
understand.
requirement, but I can't imagine that this.
No, I was just saying, no one raised that as a concern.
No, anybody. So
Drafting.
yeah, your question is that basically now we have.
Okay.
I-
Okay.
I think it's important to recognize that there are some targets within the climate action plan that are stand-ins for what we should be working towards and what we need to be doing. So we have, modeling that has changed from the climate action plan, has evolved. It's now saying we should roughly get about 27,000 plug-in electric vehicles by 2025 and 126,000 by 2030. The makeup of those vehicles are going to impact things. What we're actually trying to get are those carbon reductions. That is what we're striving towards. And so to that point, I mean, I think I've said this before to the committee, a sustainable transportation system is not just one in which we say these are our priorities: public transit, bike and pedestrian activity, and infrastructure, all these things that are within the climate action plan. It's also that we have the funding to do all these things, that we have the funding to implement EV charging infrastructure so that we can further encourage EV adoption. So it's not just kind of looking at single policies or strategies within the climate action plan. It's how they all fit together, and then how from that we're able to obtain the carbon reductions that are in fact the legal requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act.
Thank you. Okay, and any other comments or questions? Okay. So I don't think we need motions for amendments.
No, we
don't need a recorded action. So we're gonna vote. So is there, we can just do a show of hands, the people that support this amendment. Yeah, show of hands. So people that oppose the amendment. Thank you so much. Okay. So with that, did you have any information you wanted to share, Mr. Koda, on vehicle sales? Any updates?
Yeah.
If you have newer data, it would be interesting.
Yeah, so we have the March data. In terms of electric, we sold 186 registered new in Vermont. It may have been brought in from New Hampshire, but registered new in Vermont, 186.
So that's registration there or sales? When you say we sold.
So, sorry, I should say we.
Yeah.
Registered new cars in Vermont is the data that comes from Experian Auto Count. So that could have been purchased in New Jersey, but it was registered new in Vermont.
And they checked the EV box when they registered.
They checked the EV box, and that is, so through the first 3 months of 2024, there's 763 pure battery electric vehicles that were sold, and then plug-in electric vehicles, 442. These are new vehicles, not used vehicles. So just new vehicle sales, if you project that first quarter out 4 quarters, we're at 13% of our sales will be based on historical sales data on how many new cars that registered in Vermont. We're looking at 13% just new just this year, on top of used vehicle sales, electric vehicle sales, and on top of existing battery electric and sales that are re-registered. I mean, if I may, I completely understand why you want to direct these funds for electric vehicle infrastructure, because that is a key component to incentivizing or to increasing electric vehicle sales. I think fundamentally I would change the name, because I think if people think that they are paying for the roads through this charge, it's a bit of a misnomer.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, maybe we'll get to there, but at this point, we're paying for EVSE. Great idea, but it's not a road usage charge.
Good point.
I would just sort of add that there's a structure that we visited yesterday, as has been mentioned several times, and they didn't just put a building there without the ideas of selling more vehicles, that they're not going to sell more vehicles, they're going to. And that building alone would be enough, in my opinion. I've been in that business for a long time, to get us up over the top. That is a boost that's going to make it happen.
Well, I think the other dimension to that is for people that bought that brand of cars, there was no repair capacity here, which was a deterrent. Do I want to, purchase a car that I'm gonna have to take to Albany or, someplace in New Hampshire. So I guess, the hard part is you've got a document that was put in place in a very rapidly changing environment, and the extent to which what might have been a strategy or made sense in isolation with some of these other changes. I think that's what Patrick was talking about with the development of the programs. You may want to revisit, or it doesn't become sort of the absolute, like as you said, age for drinking or that kind of thing.
Imagine 5 years, 6 years out from now, the way this language is currently worded, the plug-in hybrid electrics are going to continue paying this fee, and I believe the language will still force that to go towards electric charging, right? Because we don't sunset the electric charging commitment.
Well, because it wouldn't be, the fee wouldn't be there, so there wouldn't be, the money wouldn't go there, so the MBUF would not.
If I'm not mistaken, the plug-in hybrids does not get repealed. It only gets repealed for the battery electrics. So
The MBUF would do that for the plug-in hybrid.
So to Mr. Koda's point, if we did call this an EVSE, that would force whenever those MBUFs come online, then to repeal that commitment of resources away from electric vehicle charging stations.
Right.
Or we can just let it go and let the future legislators figure that out.
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Patrick?
So I believe in the current language, what is sunsetted is not just the fee for battery electric vehicles, but it's also the language that targets the revenue from that plug-in hybrid fee towards EV charging. So we went through a couple of iterations with Donna earlier, and we've made sure that sunset also then sunsetted the targeting of that towards EV charging infrastructure. But I think the agency does agree with the renaming of the surcharge itself, to be clear about what the intent of it is and where it's going.
Okay. And do you have a suggestion for a name?
It could be an EV infrastructure surcharge or something like that, but.
And which is back to what you were suggesting.
But to be clear, Patrick, it doesn't repeal the plug-in hybrid electric fee, right? We repeal the direction towards charging, and we repeal the battery electric vehicle charge, but we keep the plug-in hybrid rate, correct?
That's right, yeah.
Thank you.
Because that was recommended in that earlier kind of study or proposal for the MBUF. Okay, well, we could either, the question is, do we make that change? Do we do an amendment? Do we wait till conference? Okay.
I do think electric vehicle owners are going to feel better about paying that fee if it's for charging stations. So.
Yeah, no, I think it is definitely better. So I guess it's just how the best way to change it. Finance still has the bill, and since it's a fee, finance could change it.
Yeah.
What name you want?
Yeah, that would be a good place to do.
Yeah, because you guys did vote it out yesterday, right?
We did not.
We don't have ledge council. You're going to rely on Logan.
EVSE charging, electric charging infrastructure fee.
I think electric charging infrastructure fee is better, but it's longer. It's like if we're going to put this on the I guess it might be a question for DMP too, or
Michelle, is your hand up?
okay, Michelle. 'Cause what I was going to say is a lot of people in the public don't know what EVSE is.
Right. Yeah, I agree that plain language would be important. I think that a little consultation on the side, maybe Patrick could reach out to Wanda to find out what constraints there might be relative to any documents and in terms of how we roll this out. But I agree, we support this change. I actually had my hand up on another element going after we're finished with this piece. I'm hoping Patrick could go back to the up to 80% conversation we were having the other day, because there's a little more information about that that I think it would be important for the committee to be aware of. That's all.
Okay, so that's on the mileage smart. But so let's finish this conversation on maybe Patrick, if you could check in with Wanda, then get Tom what we think
We're planning to vote it out this afternoon, so I'd love an email as soon as possible with any preferred names by the DMV. Hate to put pressure on you, and I can also ask to delay, but the finance was
Electric
poised.
charging infrastructure fees.
Yeah, charging, maybe just call it charging, maybe we figure it out. That would
Yeah,
be
then it's hybrid because, you know, it just seems like,
Vehicle or car charging.
yeah,
Infrastructure.
something.
If they can do that, like, yeah, they might have a character limit or something.
I think we can get you something within a couple of hours.
So if the agency could give us a recommended name, that would be great. Anybody else in the room or that's listening could give comment. Does the NATCO to have a comment on that name?
Yeah, these acronyms and these MECO for the Automobile Association, these acronyms and words change, but I think EVSE is gonna stick. And it's applicable to the actual, you're not paying for the charge, right? You're not paying for the electricity, you're paying for the equipment.
So if you use that acronym.
Supply equipment, and I think it's becoming.
Oh, if you word it out, not the acronym. I'm afraid of using the acronym.
Yeah,
The acronym is not
I agree with you. I just think it will become more known, and it's specific to the equipment, not to the electrons.
but for us, we would actually use the words, not EVC.
I think
That's what
Sophie
you
would
said.
know what it was. Like, that would be my fear, but
You may be right.
In
yeah.
statute, I think we should,
It's actually, we can use it.
and then people will shorten it anyway. Yeah.
Almost like EVSE charging infrastructure. You have the EVSE that they kind of know, and then charging infrastructure in plain language.
Kind of like saying an ATM machine.
Well, we're gonna get the recommendation from the agency that has to do this, and then we'll see if finance comes up with a good name.
Give it to Tom, he's our.
Okay, great. So Patrick, you have comments about what we thought we didn't need to change to 80%? And now you think we do, or what?
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't able to take part in that discussion. We did have a discussion in House Transportation when it was brought up, maybe mid-February. And it was the opinion of Anthea Dexter Cooper, the prior ledge counsel, that the way that at or below 80% area median income was worded, that if you provided an incentive, if you had the funding and you provided incentives, that you'd have to provide some level of incentive to someone who is at 80% or below. And so what we had proposed is just saying up to 80%, which would allow the agency and Capstone to be able to modify that and decrease the income threshold if we found that it was advisable. I think what we're seeing right now, almost $400,000 each month being used for the program, that it would be advisable to kind of more narrowly target the funding that we have and make sure that it goes to the people who really need it. And so if we had that up to 80% language, we would collectively feel more comfortable in lowering that from 80%, say, to 60%. Capstone had requested that specifically because it is the simplest thing to administer for the dealerships. They don't have to worry about changing anything regarding their the way that they're processing, the amounts that they're processing, all of that. They're just basically, it's a different, a somewhat smaller group of people that would be able to qualify.
We had some discussion and we didn't think that legally, what we had there was that you had the same flexibility whether you had up
That's
to
what we
or-
thought, but what Patrick says that,
And Thea doesn't-
thought that when it
doesn't-
says at or below, that you have to have the at and below. So if somebody that was at 80, you would still do it. But so if you wanted to lower it to 70%, somebody was at 80%, the law says at or below. But I don't know if the language has set it at 80 or below, or
What section are we talking about? That number, section what?
I don't know if it's in the bill.
Well, it's not actually a section because it didn't make it
Oh,
past House Transportation to you all, but
This
we considered it and then we thought, no.
We considered it and we agreed with the goal, but we thought we didn't need it.
Yeah.
And I think Jen Carvey was with us that day and
Didn't think we needed.
Agree with Angea's, but surprise, surprise, two lawyers don't agree on interpretation. So, but
Joe,
what
I
you're
mean-
saying is that the agency would feel better with less than,
Or up to.
up to, I mean,
Up to, yeah.
and, at or below.
In the absence of language, we would probably, we have discussed just lowering the amounts for those between like 60% and 80% and lowering some other amounts, for example, for conventional hybrids.
You don't think you
But
can
it
just
just-
say, okay, from now on it's 70%? You don't think the language allows you to do that at or
Still,
below?
it's gotta come to approach, right?
I think there's a gray area and
All these amendments in approach.
there's a gray area, and given the discussion that we had in House Transportation, I think the agency would feel more comfortable if the language had shifted those couple of words to up to rather than at or below.
Also, change the title for what we're using and make
Okay.
this change.
And then we did get an email from the Mount Scottney Regional Planning Commission that they didn't like. I haven't really looked at it, but they had some question about the RPC there and the way that Complete Streets language was written. So I don't know. I got the impression that it was like wording changes, but it would be important for some of the RPC. So
It's something in institutions that they were.
So if, we'll let you know if that becomes something that we want you to consider, or, give us your opinion on.
That would be, okay, I haven't seen anything about this or heard anything about this, so if there's anything that could be shared, that'd be great, or I'll reach out to the RPC.
In this bill,
No, it's not, we do some stuff about complete streets in the bill, and so it's language in the bill that they wanted tweaked, and they talked to House Transportation members, so I heard from the chair that just to look at it.
Just forward it to Michelle. It's dense, so we should take testimony on it if we're gonna,
Yeah, I'll look at it and see.
not too dense.
Okay. Brent, is there anything else, any other word change, any fewer than, less than changes you want to make?
Now's your time.
Yeah, I saw in the miscellaneous D&B, they switched one of our, they took out our fewer than.
Because it was wrong.
Some grammar fights coming.
I didn't press him to, but I really.
I'm sure you were lobbying the House.
Oh, I heard it.
I got it,
Yeah.
Okay.
Late night board meeting.
Okay, thank you, agency.
Thank you.
staff.
Thank you.
Anything else from the committee? Because otherwise, the only other thing I was gonna talk about is our floor report, which isn't gonna be till next week. I don't have, Jen Harvey is like a key person on 600 units or something, so she doesn't have time to do the section by section. But we,
and that takes so much time. You really think we.
Yeah. well, we have a section by section
From the house.
that the House passed, and we could just, and then we have something like
Is
this
that the
where it
Vermont
says,
climate?
no, this is the Vermont speed safety.
Camera.
We're gonna get back to cameras at some point. So we might not need it, but we do have what we did at when we passed the bill out, like which
I mean, we just ask him to do it for us. I mean, I know it's a lot
I
of
mean, she's
work.
gonna do it, but she was just like saying, don't,
It doesn't have to be as detailed as the.
Yeah,
Oh,
I'll talk to her.
Just sort of like a bullet.
Right, exactly. Right, so we can get into it if somebody has some questions.
What we got for presentation from Senator Blooms was a much more
Yeah.
detailed description,
Don't
and the
do
amount of
that.
time to do it,
Oh,
No.
I don't think is, worth the legal time that's spent.
Well, it's helpful to have if there's questions or just so you can read it, but
But usually just bullets
Yeah,
and.
I can talk to her that, and when we can get that.
From the cliff note.
Right, but if there's any sections that people should maybe look at, we got these kind of things, or if you remember, I
Yeah.
just kind of showed the House section and those Senate sections, which ones were deleted. But we just gotta need it, because we don't wanna report on the section that we deleted. That would be embarrassing.
Oh, imagine that.
Oh, wait, we
Oh, yeah, oh, shoot, yeah.
Okay, so we don't have to do that today. I'll talk to Jen to see when we get that. Because the finance is gonna vote it out today. Probes would then get it tomorrow, or does it have to go back to notice and wait a day? If you don't do anything, if they don't do anything, does it have to go back to notice? Or does it go straight to probes? Does the bill like go
No,
from
it would-
finance to
no.
notice?
No, it'll go from me, right, from committee to committee.
You would have to come back and refer to us.
Does it have to go on notice for a day?
No, what they would do, I don't think so. I think what they would do is just today or
Figure across the hall.
Tuesday, they refer it back to us.
Right, so probes would get it on Tuesday, probably get it out that day. Or you're too busy trying to get the budget
Me,
out.
We. the we,
Are we gonna be swamped that day
we
on
are.
budget stuff? So maybe Wednesday we get it out.
We could probably move it out pretty quickly because the only changes are actually gonna be reflected in the budget.
Right, and then.
The 1.7.
Well, it's like up to 80%.
All we
Two
need,
amendments.
we just need it ready and
Right.
we can spin those things out in 2 minutes.
Right, so that could, if we have time, we can fit it Tuesday, but we might need Tuesday just to get Jen to draft it or something, so Wednesday, we won't be on the floor till.
I told Ashley this, but next Friday, I have Honors Day at UVM, I'm gone all day, so I'm hoping that T-bill is not gonna be next Friday, but that's an option.
Well, it wouldn't be,
If we voted it out on Wednesday, approach would be on notice Thursday, so it would be good. But we
but you can always,
wait
just,
till Tuesday,
you could just, ask to,
or we could just not have it there, but we need your vote on the amendment.
It's true, for the finance piece.
we won't,
Yeah, you'll probably.
we're gonna do both amendments and approves. We'll just do it at one. So you don't need to worry about changing the title. We'll do the up to and the name change.
I already sent an email, shoot, I will.
Okay, well, you just, fine,
Probably be a little easier to have one,
just
unless
one.
finance wants to do it, like, it's okay with me that two amendments.
I think it would be easier, I think it's easier to do just one.
Yeah.
Since we're both pretty familiar with it.
Similarly, here, the bill line H861 telemedicine, I'm just kind of curious if you're gonna move it, if it's,
Yeah,
1,000 things going on.
when did I get sent?
2 days ago.
You realize we're doing probably the equivalent of about 15 bills in the budget. It's just, we're getting hammered,
I shouldn't even ask.
huh?
No.
I got a phone message, don't forget the fishing derby, we need 30,000. Don't forget this, and don't forget that, well, what about this?
And wait,
I have
bill's coming.
Oh, yeah, and here, we'd like to have you fund three.
I have the fishing derby taken care of.
You do?
Yeah. I'm
The
gonna-
salt?
These all fish, I think we
No.
changed that to the
No,
institutional fish.
no, not the Salisbury. LCI wanted $30,000, and I'm gonna take care of that, and I thought that's what you're talking
Yeah,
about.
Oh, yeah?
that is what.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
so, okay, well, I was gonna take care of it, and then if you want, it's up to you.
Well, if you want to,
Yeah.
I was gonna put it in the capital.
with the Salisbury, there's kind of a nice
Yeah,
nexus there.
yeah, absolutely.
You grow them and then you fish them.
Yeah.
And then we're gonna have a cooking class.
That makes sense.
So, yeah, so I
So
can,
you're taking
I'm
care-
planning on taking care of that 30,000.
Oh, all right, good, thank you.
I've asked BGS to switch over some cash to bond, and I'll take care of it.
All right, great, thank you.
And you got another email, sorry, but I apologize to you, from Abby from Kingdom Trails. Just look at it, just look at the email. So.
All right, well, we probably can adjourn.